Okay.
Hey, Marty, how are you doing today?
Good, Alison. How are you?
Good. It's good to be back with you all. Here we are again, just going to go at it and talk a little bit about what Paul David Tripp had for us today. And so we are discussing the chapters of inability and identity. And so we'll start real quick with inability. And I think it is just such a humbling scenario to kind of come to the Lord and say, you are the one who has all power in my parenting and my relationships, Lord, and that I am ultimately powerless to anybody else. And I think that's a great thing for us to sit with and really process. And I'm excited to kind of just allow the group time to do that around their tables. But okay, I've already messed up. Sorry, I just need to start over.
Okay. Just go ahead.
Right. Hey, everybody. It's good to be with you again today. How are you, Marty?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thanks. We are glad to be back to just dive into a little further discussion on the chapters today of inability and identity. And so Paul David Tripp, has another great message for us today and what it looks like for us to truly submit all power to Christ and allow ourselves to really just sit humbly at his feet and recognize that we are ultimately powerless when it comes to changing anybody, and then definitely our children. And so what a great message for us today. I really hope that we can see this chapter one, that we can really just take all of our anxieties and burdens to the Lord and not feel like we have to go day to day and hold those on our own, because that can be a really heavy place to be, full of worry, anxiety, depression. And so it's really neat for us to think about how God really desires to hold all of that for us and support us.
Yeah, the whole idea of inability is actually a pathway to confession. It's a pathway to peace, because when I ultimately figure out that, oh, I can't make my child change, I have a hard time even making myself change. So I can just accept the fact that God is the one I'm inviting into my scenarios to change all of us from the inside out.
Yes, it's awesome. Well, I think it was great. I mean, we obviously need God. And then I think we also need community. And one thing that came to mind, Marty, when he was talking in this chapter of inability was that we just had these lessons last semester from Hetty Brits that allowed us to really explore our personality as a mom. And we sat around the table and we all 1 week shared areas that we have been gifted or that are our strengths as moms. And we were able to kind of look through at the table and find other strengths and other mom personalities and really see how, as a community, we can come together and really tackle this parenting thing as a community of moms.
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind is that, yes, we are enabled, but what is it that Paul is saying that we're enabled to do? We're enabled to change somebody from the inside out by ourselves. And even the friends around our tables couldn't come over to my house and make my children change, right? But that doesn't mean we're powerless. That doesn't mean we're enabled in all ways. As a matter of fact, like around our tables, there's lots of ideas on how we can create environments of change. Like what can work for one child or another child, or what has worked in one home versus another, could be exactly what I'm looking for in my own parenting. And so that's the encouragement that I have in Moms Together, is that we're better together.
That's definitely true. So diving into our first question then, Marty, on this topic of inability, Paul David Tripp lays out for us these 3 power tools that parents often rely on to basically just show control or gain control in their children. And so he references the use of rewards, shame, and fear. And so I'm wondering if you have an example from your years of parenting that highlights how Paul David Tripp is saying maybe not to do it, and maybe what Paul David Tripp is saying to do in these scenarios instead.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'll use a scenario involving my son when he was a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Being a student just didn't come real naturally to him. He struggled with math. And we would sit down and start doing his math problems, and he would instantaneously almost evaporate. His soul would just disintegrate because, and he would start crying and just so bitter that, oh, this is stupid, and my teacher and terrible stuff. And as a parent, I thought, well, I think I'm going to give him a reward. So he's pitching a fit, but I'm going to throw him a curveball. So I got my piggy bank and I started flicking money at him just across the table, just started moving it over. And the minute money hit the table, his entire face changed. His neurochemistry changed. He quit crying. So I knew I was onto something as far as his conditioning goes, right? He can be bought. Was my thought.
All right.
And we were able to accomplish all his homework for about $1.52. I mean, just with a little bit of incentive. So I could have let it like stop at that. And I think sometimes that's all we do as parents is we create the stars, or we create the pattern of reward, and then we give them the reward, and then that's it. But like with my son, I actually think I had a Paul David Tripp moment when I would say to him, now, John, I just was able to encourage you to complete your homework for $1.52. And what if I took all that money away? Do you know that you had the power to do that on your own? Do you know that the Spirit of God in you makes you able to do exceedingly abundantly more than all that you could ask or imagine? And math is really no problem at all. And so I actually did have before I knew about Paul David Tripp, I was able to kind of think through, how do you transform this heart from the inside out? And in my mind, it's where we wrap things up and we try to bring the word of God. We try to bring just the wonder of God, of Jesus around us to our children, for them to go, huh, wow, yeah, Dad, that's a good point,
Well, great example. Thanks for sharing. Let's dive in then quick to the chapter on identity. And so Paul David Tripp, he kind of lays it out for us. I mean, he lays it out in a way that allows us to see or ask ourselves, are we actually, trying to find our identity in our children, or are we doing a good job, finding it in the Lord? But he also tells us that, it's not natural for us to find our identity in the Lord always. It's more natural for us to want to find it in our children.
Yes.
He then also says that we will be miserable if we rely on our children for our identity. And then he also says that it's a crushing burden for our children to have to hold on to that expectation and standard that we're constantly putting on them if they are in fact holding our identity. And so it's important, I think, for us to, dive a little deeper, identify ways in which we allow our worldviews, our own belief systems to guide our parenting versus really turning to God or the Bible in what he says should be our overarching themes of parenting. Right. And so I don't know, do you have another example for us today for showing how maybe you have fallen victim to wanting to use your own belief system or worldview to parent, and maybe what would Paul David Tripp say you should have shifted to instead in that moment?
Well, I was just thinking, I have a story maybe I've never told you before, and that is that, as a pastor, a pastor's kids, there's a lot of pressure on them. And you may not know it, but I'm kind of insecure in ways. Like I really worry about how do people perceive me? Do people like me? And so that pressure goes to my kids. Like my kids can really embarrass me if they don't look somebody in the eye and say hello and glad to meet you. And so even when they were children, if they would start to act up and get into trouble or anything like that, I would feel embarrassed. Like I needed to bring some control to the moment. Why? So that I felt better. So it was hard for my kids to feel like it was okay to be a kid, around me sometimes. And so that's where I brought my own worldview, my own need to the table, and I would leverage it onto my kids. Now, I think that was in the early days. I think it didn't take too long for me to realize that, I needed to back off or else my kids were going to hate church and hate Jesus
No.
and all those
Yeah.
kind of things, right? But yeah, my children were not made to be walking around as my emblems,
Mm-hmm.
right? My identity. They couldn't carry that.
Sure.
So
I think that's a great point. I think I myself need to occasionally be checked on whether I'm holding my kids to a maturity level, even that they
mhm.
can't meet based on their own development. And so, because I agree, there's this standard of, respect or good behavior in public or, in front of others that we do like to see,
Yeah,
um, even if it's not realistic for us to always hold them to that perfection standard.
I agree.
So, well, thank you so much for diving into this topic a little bit more and answering a few more practical questions on the matter. So we will leave you all to your table group discussion time now and look forward to talking to you again next week. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Allison. Bye-bye.